Transitional rapier is a term that is problematic, I guess, in the sense that depending on your position, transitional rapiers may not even be a thing, or you may have a very precise understanding of like where the limits of transitional rapiers lie for you. There isn't really a definition of it that everyone can agree on. So what we normally use it for is to kind of define a certain type of sword that comes in between the maturity or the decline phase of the rapier and the rise of the standardized or the more typical, stereotypical small sword. And these swords often have a lot of characteristics of both. So they may be outwardly more similar to what you would see on a small sword, so they kind of lose the fancy hilt, like the swept hilt kind of vibe from the stereotypical rapier, let's say, and they pick up characteristics that we'll then commonly see on the small sword. But in this case, specifically for this sword, it's even the size of the grip here. This is way bigger than what you would see on a standard small sword, for example. So out of all the small swords I've seen or own, some of which fall probably into the transitional rapier category, this I feel is probably, at least as far as I can tell, the one that most decidedly falls into the transitional rapier category. It is, if we compare it to another very similar sword, you'll see that the difference in the size of the guard here in the hilt is considerable. And it's hard to say when it comes to the blade, because this one unfortunately seems to me like it's been shortened at some point, but we'll look at it in just a moment. But yeah, this feels like it's still in the phase before the small sword actually shrinks to small sword. So anyway, without talking too much about a typology of sword that many don't even consider real, let's start looking at this sword in detail. Okay, so is it a rapier or is it a small sword? This is what we're going to try and answer in today's video. Actually, we're going to look at the specs of this sword a little in detail. So, as I mentioned in previous videos where we measured it, look how much space you have to kind of operate the sword. Compared to other small swords, look where the pommel ends. It ends kind of in your wrist, but it's long. It doesn't kind of end at the end of your hand. And even then, look how much space there is. Imagine here, okay, we're missing the shells, of course, but I'd have room to move my thumb in a lot of different positions. My finger, actually, I could use the side where we still have a finger ring. Well, the finger here, the ring is a little bent, so I don't know if this is of the time or if it's just damage that happened later. But my finger, even with that bend and this little bit of a sharp edge here, can move very comfortably. I can kind of grip it holding the quillion block, essentially, very comfortably. Of course, the pommel being extended this way has an impact on its balance, and this sword is really well balanced, I would say. It's not tip heavy by any means, but it's also not hilt heavy as you would see, well, for example, on the brass hilted small sword I have as well. Now, there's not a lot to see, unfortunately, in terms of the hilt because it's not in the best shape. But what is really interesting here, I think, is that we get to see how these were built. So you have one piece is the guard that's made of these two frames. And you'll see they have these enlargements that you'll also see in a lot of walloon-hilted swords, for example. So this is fairly typical of a lot of swords of the 17th century, late 17th century probably in this case. But yeah, at the joining points or at the middle of a metal bar, you'll have these kind of twin enlargements that kind of connect. In terms of decoration, there isn't much. Unfortunately, we don't know what may have been on the shells, but we do have some lines like radiating out from the ricasso area. And this is actually quite similar. We have a similar design, although maybe a little more crude. On the, actually I can show you because I have it here, but on this small sword, which is, it's the smaller sibling, I would say, of this one, and the maybe younger sibling, you'll see this kind of design with lines is repeated on both swords. Here they're more spaced out, and here instead they're more concentrated, but just something to notice. And you'll also see a leftover, perhaps, of that connecting point. But by now, by this hilt, the enlargements have disappeared, kind of. It's a smooth frame here, but it maintains this little kind of separating mid line. Okay, moving on to the Quillion block. You'll see it's missing the washer that some of the small swords I showed previously have. And it's also missing that lip that kind of holds everything in place that we saw actually on the sword I just showed earlier. So here, what keeps everything in place are these little shoulders on the blade that hold things in place. Now, was there something here, like a shim or something, a lip bent over to hold things in place? It's possible, but we don't have it anymore. This is loose though, so it does stand to reason that there may have been something to hold everything there. Now, we can look at the Quillion section here at the actual crossguard, and we see it's simple, but it has some fluting. I would say it's simple, but it's not crude. This fluting requires work. You have to kind of carve into the Quillion these straight lines. It's not just a matter of just carving like a groove or something. So some work went into this, although again, it's not a fancy object or anything. I doubt this was something for a really fancy person. We'll see that the Quillions are very similar, again, to what we saw in its younger sibling. So look at the shape of the Quillions here. We have the same kind of blob shape, I suppose, with these little nipples, I suppose, at the tip. We have the same kind of curvature, well, up and down, but also vaguely to the side. This Quillion kind of curves a little bit to my left. This one is fairly straight, this one here, so it's not as curved as instead you see here, where you see a distinct S shape, I would say. But just compare it, for example, to these Quillions to see what a difference in style you have between early small swords. Now, something happened to this sword for sure, because you'll see that the current grip does not really align with the Quillion block perfectly. I mean, it could be that it's just been bent out of shape at some point. But then again, the grip I don't think is original. Well, this wire for sure isn't original. There's like some green wire, but this feels soft. It's like, and it doesn't look like leather to me. This looks like some kind of gauze or something. I mean, obviously something was wrapped around it. Oh, so under here, there's probably cord or rope, because you can actually see the texture underneath the whatever this is. This feels soft and almost fabric-y, I would say. So it's hard to tell. You could see potentially something here. I'll have to, but you can see how if I press my nail there, it goes like it's soft. So whether or not underneath here is the original cord, that's possible, but I have serious doubts that this wrapping is original, and for sure that green wire is not original. The pommel is way more reminiscent of older swords and rapiers than what we've seen on some of the other small swords I've shown. So this is one of the elements, I think, that actually shows that this sword is, you could say, first step into a modern style of sword, but it still maintains a lot of the older characteristics. The peen, to me, seems like it has not been tampered with, but you can see it's still perfectly patinated in the same sheen and color as the rest of the pommel here. There's no like later hammer marks, or at least none that I can see, but you know, I'm not a world-class expert in recognizing later peen jobs. So overall, a very interesting hilt, even though it's in rather rough shape. I didn't mention, of course, but you probably noticed it yourself, that it's missing one of the rings here. So something happened there and it popped off. Now, the blade is really interesting because unlike the other small swords I have of, let's say, early phase, this is a lenticular section. So all of the other ones are, in one way or another, diamond cross section, whether that is hollow ground or whether that is just forged or whether it has fuller at some point in the blade, but they all tend to the diamond section. This one is lenticular, and it's lenticular, I would say, all the way up the blade, so it doesn't like transition into a diamond section or anything. Also, one big difference in this blade compared to the other ones, and you can check it out on the measurement video as well, but is how quickly it tapers, let's say, to a almost flat blade towards this section, especially if you consider how thick it is still at the end of the blade. Now, I did mention that this may have been shortened at some point, so it may have gone along further, but this blade starts being flat already when the blade is still quite wide. So that's something to consider as well. You'll see the blade is in rather rough shape. This sword was, it's edging on relic condition, I would say. It's been corroded and pitted here for sure. You see here a lot of pitting as well. There's pitting all along the length of the blade. It's not the worst. I've seen worse. But, you know, people that collect pristine condition swords would probably not be happy with this. We can look at the tip. Now, as I mentioned, it's been reworked. Now, whether or not that means it was shortened, I don't know. Of course, if it hadn't been shortened, this would mean that this blade would have ended in a rather broad kind of tip, unlike some of the other small swords we see. What's interesting here, I mentioned it in a previous video, of course, is that the cutting edge here, so this is the edge of the sword, the bottom edge, let's say, has these grind marks that are definitely more visible than here on this side. So although, who knows, you have some here as well. So my impression was that maybe they sharpened this side more to deliver like some tip cutting. Maybe that also has to do with why the tip is kind of biased towards the left here. But, you know, this is all speculation. There's no way to really know what went through the mind of whoever was sharpening it. If anything, it may just be a sloppy job, of course. Now, this sword is sharp. Not sharp to the point that, like, razor sharp, but you can feel, and you need to be a little bit careful here, because especially on some of the edges here, like this point here, it bites on my skin, let's say. So this one, even though it's in horrible condition, like it's gone through a lot of battering, you can see, of course, but it's still in fairly good shape. Now, the most interesting thing about this sword, though, is the remains of engravings we see here. So towards the forte here, we see what looks like a... it looks to me like it could be a coat of arms. It's a middle way between one of those typical abstract designs and what could be a coat of arms. I can't really define what it is exactly. But I don't know, it's not the typical floral pattern, and it seems to have these X's here, like 2 X's. But it's also not a coat of arms. So if anyone of you recognizes this kind of pattern, I would love to hear your thoughts. What's really the most interesting thing, though, well, as you move up here, you also have a heart with 2 arrows in it, a flaming heart, it looks. There's definitely something above the heart there. Look at what beautiful shadowing they did here. And you have this little cross pattern to show the shadow area of the heart, and you have the tips of the arrows. But then as you move on up the blade, there's this weird script that I have no clue what it can be. I cannot, for the life of me, recognize it. So my initial thought, and some other people I showed it to thought this may be some kind of Cyrillic script. So either Balkan, like Serbia or Bulgaria perhaps, but let's say areas where they use Cyrillic script. Or, of course, any other area where they use Cyrillic script, like Russia, for example. But it doesn't seem... I'm no expert in Cyrillic, but this just does not seem like full Cyrillic to me. This could be a E, this could be an L, this and this looks like a P, this is maybe an R. But it has a lot of this round, loopy shape to it. And someone in the comments, when I actually asked about it previous time, mentioned it may be Armenian or some kind of similar script. So if any of you recognizes this as a like capital version of Armenian, or if you recognize what this alphabet may be, I would be eternally grateful, because I think understanding what is written here, or at least what script it's in, could unlock a lot of information on the sword, which otherwise would be lost forever. So if I'm able to, I'll do a tracing of it, and I'll post a picture maybe in posts or something. Oh, and here also there's some more decoration. Unfortunately, it's been eaten away by corrosion and rust, so it's hard to tell what it is, but there's some further decoration after the writing there. So hard to say. I really hope some of you can help, but even if you can't, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you soon in another sword video. Bye.